For the hearers themselves, the lack of a definitive explanation was deeply frustrating. They were not seeking attention or trying to create a mystery. They simply wanted relief from a persistent and intrusive noise. Some tried wearing earplugs, but that only made the hum seem louder. Others moved to different parts of town, or even left Taos entirely. A few found that the hum diminished or disappeared when they traveled far from the area, but it often returned when they came back. The experience of living with the hum took a psychological toll that extended beyond the immediate discomfort. Hearers described feeling alienated from their community. They became reluctant to talk about the hum because they feared being labeled as eccentric or unstable. Some withdrew socially. They stopped attending community events. They avoided conversations where the hum might come up. The silence became its own burden. There were financial consequences as well. Some hearers found it difficult to work because the H number, the Taos hum. Imagine standing in your own bedroom, trying to fall asleep. The lights are off, the windows are closed, your house is silent. But somewhere, just beneath the threshold of normal hearing, there is a sound, a low drone. A hum that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You press your hands over your ears, but it does not stop. If anything, it grows louder. You check outside. Nothing. You ask your partner if they can hear it. They look at you with concern and say no. You are alone with this noise. It follows you from room to room. It keeps you awake at night. And no one believes you. For a small fraction of residents in Taos, New Mexico, this is not a nightmare. It is reality. Taos sits in north-central New Mexico, cradled between the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the Rio Grande Gorge. The town itself has fewer than 6,000 residents. Artists and writers have long been drawn to its high desert beauty, its adobe architecture, and its reputation as a place where the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary feels thin. Julia Roberts once lived here. So did Dennis Hopper. The town attracts those seeking inspiration, solitude, or escape. But in the early months of 1991, some residents began to notice something strange. It was not a sight or a smell. It was a sound that should not have been there. At first, only a handful of people mentioned it. A low hum, barely audible. Some described it as sounding like a diesel engine idling in the distance. Others compared it to the thrum of industrial machinery or the vibration of a large compressor. The sound was not loud. It was subtle, but it was persistent. And once you heard it, it was almost impossible to ignore. Those who could hear it began calling themselves hearers. They did not know each other at first. They lived in different parts of town. Some were newcomers to Taos. Others had lived there for decades. But they all reported the same thing. A low-frequency drone that seemed to have no identifiable source. It was loudest at night, when ambient noise faded away. It was more noticeable indoors than outdoors, and it seemed to intensify in certain locations within their own homes. Bob and Katanya Saltzman were among the first to speak publicly about the hum. Bob was a retired engineer. Katanya was a writer. They lived south of Ranchos de Taos in a quiet, rural area. The hum started for them in early 1991. At first, Bob assumed it was a problem with their heating system. He checked the furnace, he checked the water heater, he checked every piece of equipment in the house. Nothing was running that could produce the sound. He went outside and walked the property. The hum seemed fainter outdoors, but it was still there. When he returned inside, it was louder again. Bob was methodical. He had spent his career solving technical problems. He approached the hum the way he would approach any engineering puzzle. He walked through every room with a handheld recorder, trying to capture the sound. The recordings came back empty. There was nothing on the tape that matched what he was hearing. He checked the electrical panel. He inspected the plumbing. He even climbed onto the roof to examine the ventilation system. Everything was in working order. The Saltzmans began keeping a log. They noted the times when the hum was strongest. They recorded the weather conditions. They tracked whether it was louder on certain days of the week. The patterns they found were puzzling. The hum did seem to be more intense at night, but not every night. Sometimes it would be loud for several nights in a row, then disappear for a few days. There was no apparent connection to weather, temperature, or wind conditions. Catania described the hum as oppressive. It kept her awake at night. She would lie in bed, listening to the low drone, wondering if she was losing her mind. She asked Bob if he could hear it. He could. That was some relief. At least she was not imagining it. But when they asked neighbors, most people looked at them blankly. No one else seemed to hear anything unusual. The isolation was profound. When you are experiencing something that others cannot perceive, you begin to question your own senses. Catania found herself second-guessing everything. Was the hum really there? Was she becoming overly sensitive? She tried to ignore it, but that only made it worse. The hum seemed to grow louder the more she tried to push it away. It invaded her thoughts. It disrupted her work. She would sit at her desk, trying to write, and the low drone would pull her attention away. Bob tried to be supportive, but he was frustrated too. He was used to finding solutions. This problem had no solution. He contacted the county health department. They sent someone out to check for radon gas and other environmental hazards. The tests came back clean. He called the electric company, wondering if there might be a problem with the power lines. They inspected the lines and found nothing wrong. He even contacted the local water utility, thinking it might be related to underground pipes. Again, nothing. One evening, Bob drove to different parts of Taos, stopping every few miles to roll down his window and listen. He wanted to see if the hum was localized or widespread. He heard it everywhere he went. It was fainter in some places, stronger in others, but it was always there. When he returned home, he felt defeated. Whatever this sound was, it was not confined to their property. It was something larger, something that covered the entire area. The Saltzmans were not alone. Over the next 2 years, more residents came forward. A woman who worked at the Taos Public Library said she heard the hum primarily between 8 in the evening and 9 in the morning. A man living near the Taos Pueblo described it as a feeling as much as a sound, a vibration that seemed to resonate in his chest. Another resident said it was like standing next to a power transformer, except there was no transformer nearby. The reports began to accumulate. An elderly couple living on the outskirts of town said they had been hearing the hum for years, but had never mentioned it to anyone. They thought it was just part of living in the high desert. A young woman in her 20s said the hum started for her shortly after she moved to Taos. She had never experienced anything like it before. She described it as a low throb that made her feel anxious and uneasy. Some hearers reported that the hum seemed to follow them. One man said he could hear it at home, at work, and even when he drove into Santa Fe, which was more than 60 miles away. A woman claimed that the hum woke her up at night, as if it intensified when she fell asleep. Another resident said he only heard it in certain rooms of his house. His bedroom was the worst. He started sleeping on the couch in the living room, where the hum was slightly less noticeable. The hearers came from all walks of life. Some were artists and writers. Others were retirees or small business owners. A few worked at nearby government facilities. There was no obvious demographic pattern. Men and women heard it in roughly equal numbers. The hearers ranged in age from their 20s to their 70s, though most were middle-aged. Some had lived in Taos for decades. Others were newcomers. The only thing they had in common was the hum. Not everyone heard the same thing. Some described a steady drone. Others said it pulsed or modulated, rising and falling in intensity. A few claimed they could feel it vibrating through the floor or walls. But despite these variations, there was a consistency to the reports. The frequency was always low, the sound was always persistent, and it was always maddening. One hearer described the experience as feeling like her head was inside a bell that had just been struck. The vibration was not loud, but it was constant. Another said it was like listening to a distant generator running underground. The sound was always there, humming away beneath the surface of things. A retired teacher said the hum reminded her of the low note on a pipe organ, sustained indefinitely. Some hearers developed their own strategies for coping. One woman found that running a fan at night helped mask the hum. Another discovered that listening to music through headphones provided temporary relief. A man said he started taking long walks in the evening, hoping that physical activity would tire him out enough to sleep through the noise. Nothing worked for long. The hum always came back. There were also those who found the hum strangely compelling. A local artist said it had a meditative quality, as if the earth itself was breathing. He claimed it helped him focus when he painted. Another resident said the hum felt ancient, like something that had always been there but had only recently become audible. These positive interpretations were rare. For most hearers, the hum was nothing but a source of misery. By 1993, frustration among hearers had reached a breaking point. Some reported headaches and dizziness. Others complained of insomnia. A few said they suffered nosebleeds or a constant pressure in their ears. One woman moved out of Taos entirely, hoping to escape the hum. But even after she left, she claimed she could still hear it, as if it had followed her. The physical symptoms were distressing. Hearers described feeling exhausted all the time. Sleep deprivation took its toll. They became irritable. They had trouble concentrating. Some experienced anxiety or depression. A few sought medical help, but doctors found nothing wrong. Blood tests were normal. Hearing tests showed no abnormalities. Neurological exams came back clean. From a medical perspective, there was nothing to explain the symptoms. The psychological impact was equally severe. Hearers began to feel isolated. Friends and family members who could not hear the hum sometimes questioned whether it was real. This skepticism was painful. It is one thing to suffer from an invisible ailment. It is another to have your suffering dismissed or doubted. Some hearers stopped talking about the hum altogether. They withdrew into themselves, enduring the noise in silence. Relationships became strained. Spouses who could not hear the hum struggled to understand what their partners were going through. One couple separated after the husband accused his wife of exaggerating the problem. Another couple moved to separate bedrooms because the wife needed to run a loud fan at night to mask the hum, and the noise kept her husband awake. The hum was not just a nuisance, it was tearing lives apart. The hearers organized. They wrote letters to local officials. They contacted newspapers. They demanded answers. Taos was not a large town, but the issue was serious enough that it eventually reached the New Mexico congressional delegation. In the spring of 1993, Congress authorized an investigation. The goal was to determine what was causing the hum, whether it posed a health risk, and whether it could be stopped. The decision to investigate was not without controversy. Some Taos residents who could not hear the hum were dismissive. They accused the hearers of being overly sensitive or seeking attention. There were whispers that it was all in their heads. Some blamed the influx of artists and New Age practitioners who had moved to Taos in recent years, suggesting they were more susceptible to suggestion or prone to imagining things. The term newcomers was sometimes used as a polite insult, but the congressional delegation took the matter seriously. Representative Bill Richardson was among those who pushed for an investigation. He recognized that even if the hum turned out to be a psychological phenomenon, the suffering of the hearers was real. They deserved answers, and if the hum was caused by something external, particularly something related to government or military activity, then the public had a right to know. The involvement of Congress added legitimacy to the hearers' claims. It also fueled speculation. If Congress was investigating, then surely there must be something significant going on. Theories began to circulate. Some suggested the hum was related to underground military installations. Others thought it might be linked to nuclear testing or secret experiments at nearby Los Alamos National Laboratory. The fact that the investigation would involve scientists from Los Alamos only deepened the suspicion. The team assembled to investigate the Taos hum was not a group of amateurs. It included scientists and engineers from the University of New Mexico, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, and Phillips Air Force Laboratory. Leading the effort was Joe Mullins, a mechanical engineering professor at the University of New Mexico. Also on the team was Horace Poteet from Sandia National Laboratories. Poteet was significant because he was one of the few investigators who could actually hear the hum. That gave him a personal stake in solving the mystery. The investigation began with interviews. Mullins and his team spoke to 10 self-identified hearers, including the Saltzmans. They wanted to understand the subjective experience of the hum before attempting to measure it objectively. The hearers were consistent in their descriptions. Most said the hum had an abrupt beginning, as if some device had been switched on. It was loudest at night. It was more noticeable indoors. And it seemed to be strongest in certain rooms, particularly bedrooms. The interviews revealed other details as well. Many hearers said the hum was more noticeable when they were lying down. Sitting up or standing seemed to reduce its intensity slightly. Several reported that the hum disappeared when they were in a moving vehicle, but returned as soon as they stopped. A few said they could change the perceived pitch of the hum by moving their head or tilting it to one side. These observations suggested that the perception of the hum might be influenced by body position or head orientation. One hearer described an experiment he had conducted on his own. He had driven to different locations around Taos, stopping at intervals to see if the hum changed. In some places, it was barely audible. In others, it was overpowering. He mapped out these locations and noticed that the strongest areas seemed to form a rough pattern, though he could not determine what it meant. The investigators were intrigued by this account. If the hum had geographic variation, that might provide clues to its source. The team also asked about the emotional impact of the hum. Nearly all the hearers described feelings of frustration and helplessness. Some said the hum made them feel as if they were being watched or monitored. One woman confessed that she sometimes wondered if the hum was a warning, a signal of something terrible about to happen. These responses highlighted the psychological toll of living with an unexplained phenomenon. To test whether the hearers were actually perceiving a real sound, the team set up equipment to generate matching tones. They used a low-frequency speaker and a modulated sine wave generator. 8 out of 10 hearers were able to match the sound they were perceiving to a tone produced by the equipment. Each hearer matched the same frequency quite reproducibly. This suggested that they were not simply imagining the hum, they were perceiving something consistent and measurable, at least to their own ears. The next step was to survey the broader population. The team distributed questionnaires to residents throughout Taos and the surrounding area. They received responses from 1,440 people. The results were striking. Approximately 2% of respondents reported hearing the hum. That translated to roughly 161 people in the Taos area. The hearers were split almost evenly between men and women. Most were between the ages of 30 and 59. About 80% said they heard the hum at least once per week. 19% claimed they could hear it even when they were more than 50 miles away from Taos. The team then deployed a range of sensitive instruments. They built a custom microphone from an 18-inch woofer to detect ultra-low frequency sounds. They installed geophones to measure seismic activity. They used magnetometers to detect electromagnetic fields. They set up antennas to monitor radio and electromagnetic signals across a wide spectrum. The equipment was placed in multiple locations, including the Saltzman residence, the Taos golf course, and several remote sites near Tres Piedras. For several weeks, the team collected data. They recorded sound, seismic vibrations, and electromagnetic emissions. They monitored continuously, hoping to capture the hum in action. But when they analyzed the data, they found nothing unusual. The microphone detected ambient noise, but nothing that matched the frequencies and characteristics described by the hearers. The geophones recorded background seismic noise, but nothing significant. One event turned out to be a gopher burrowing near the sensor. The magnetometers detected the usual electromagnetic interference from power lines, but nothing extraordinary. The lack of measurable signals was perplexing. The hearers had been able to match the hum to specific frequencies in laboratory tests. They were perceiving something, But that something was not showing up on any of the instruments. Either the hum was too faint to detect, or it existed at a level just below the threshold of the equipment. Another possibility was that the hum was not a traditional sound wave at all. Perhaps it was something else entirely. The team expanded their search. They took measurements at more remote locations, far from power lines and human habitation. If the hum was caused by industrial or electrical sources, it should be weaker in these areas. But hearers reported the opposite. Some said the hum was just as strong, if not stronger, in remote locations. This finding ruled out many conventional explanations. One particularly puzzling observation came from a site near Tres Piedras, a small community west of Taos. This area was exceptionally quiet. There were no power lines nearby. The nearest road was miles away. Yet several hearers said the hum was intense there. The team set up their equipment and monitored for several days. The electromagnetic readings showed almost nothing. The seismic sensors were silent. The microphones picked up only the sound of wind. But the hearers insisted the hum was present. They could hear it clearly. It was maddening to the investigators. They were looking at empty data while the hearers were experiencing something undeniable. The team did find elevated levels of 60 Hz electromagnetic radiation, the frequency associated with electrical power lines. This was not surprising, given the prevalence of electrical infrastructure in the area. They also detected the Schumann resonances, which are low-frequency electromagnetic waves generated by lightning activity in the Earth's atmosphere. These resonances occur naturally and fall within the frequency range reported by hearers. But they appeared to be at normal amplitude levels and did not correlate with the times or locations where the hum was strongest. The investigation also looked into suspicions that the hum might be related to military activity. New Mexico is home to several defense installations, including White Sands Missile Range and Kirtland Air Force Base. Some hearers believed the hum was caused by the U.S. Navy's extremely low-frequency stations, which are used to communicate with submarines. These stations operate in the 65 to 75 Hz range, which overlaps with some of the frequencies reported by hearers, but the team found no evidence of ELF transmissions in the Taos area. There were no unusual electromagnetic signals that could be attributed to military sources. In August 1993, the team released its findings. The report was careful and measured. It acknowledged that the hearers were perceiving something real. The consistency of their reports and their ability to match tones suggested that they were not simply suffering from mass hysteria or auditory hallucinations, but the team could not identify the source of the hum. They found no external acoustic signals, no seismic events, and no electromagnetic anomalies that could explain it. The report included several recommendations. The team suggested further research into the physiology of hearing, particularly the perception of low-frequency sounds. They proposed additional studies to determine whether hearers had unique characteristics in their auditory systems. They also called for more sophisticated monitoring equipment, though they acknowledged that funding for such work was uncertain. The release of the report was met with mixed reactions. For the hearers, it was both a validation and a disappointment. On one hand, the investigation confirmed that they were not crazy. A team of reputable scientists had taken their concerns seriously and conducted a thorough inquiry. On the other hand, the mystery remained unsolved. The hum was still there, it was still affecting their lives, and there was no clear path forward. Some Taos residents who did not hear the hum were skeptical of the findings. If the instruments could not detect anything, then what were the hearers actually perceiving? The report left room for interpretation, and some chose to interpret it as evidence that the hum was psychological rather than physical. This interpretation angered the hearers. They felt dismissed once again, even though the report had explicitly stated that the phenomenon was real. The report raised more questions than it answered. If the hum was not coming from an external source, where was it coming from? Was it possible that the hearers were perceiving something that existed only in their own auditory systems? The team considered several possibilities. One theory was that the hum might be related to otoacoustic emissions. These are faint sounds produced by the inner ear itself. Most people are unaware of these emissions because they are drowned out by ambient noise. But in a quiet environment, some individuals might become aware of them. The problem with this theory was that otoacoustic emissions are typically high-frequency sounds, not the low-frequency drone described by hearers. Another possibility was tinnitus, a condition where individuals hear ringing or buzzing in their ears. Tinnitus affects roughly 10 to 14% of the population, but tinnitus is also usually high frequency and does not match the characteristics of the Taos hum. Moreover, many hearers insisted that the hum they were perceiving had a distinct external quality. It seemed to come from outside their bodies, not from inside their heads. And unlike tinnitus, which is constant, the Taos hum seemed to fluctuate in intensity and sometimes disappeared altogether. Joe Mullins later wrote about this distinction in an article for the Acoustical Society of America. He noted that tinnitus sufferers typically cannot match their perceived sound to external tones in the way that Taos hearers could. Tinnitus is subjective and varies from moment to moment. The Taos hum, by contrast, was consistent. When hearers were asked to match the sound on different occasions, they matched it to the same frequencies. This reproducibility suggested that they were perceiving something more concrete than tinnitus. Another difference was the way hearers described the hum's behavior. Many said the hum intensified when they entered certain rooms or buildings. Tinnitus does not work that way. It is internal and should not change based on location, but the Taos hum did change. It was stronger in some places and weaker in others. This geographic variation hinted at an external source, even if that source could not be detected. A more intriguing hypothesis was that some individuals might have an unusual sensitivity to low-frequency sounds or electromagnetic fields. Research has shown that certain animals, such as pigeons and sea turtles, can detect magnetic fields. In 2019, a study suggested that human brains might also be sensitive to magnetic fields, though the mechanisms are not fully understood. In 2021, researchers confirmed that living cells can sense magnetic fields, but there is no clear evidence that this sensitivity could manifest as an auditory perception like the Taos hum. The idea of heightened sensitivity raises interesting questions. Evolution has equipped different species with different sensory capabilities. Bats use echolocation. Sharks detect electrical fields. Elephants communicate with infrasound over long distances. Perhaps some humans have retained or developed sensitivities that most of us lack. If the Taos hum is a real physical phenomenon occurring at extremely low levels, then only those with exceptional sensitivity would perceive it. This theory could explain why hearers often describe the hum as having an external quality. They are not imagining it, they are detecting something real, but that something is so faint or so unusual that it falls outside the range of normal human perception. Most people walk through the world deaf to this signal. Hearers, by contrast, cannot escape it. There is also the question of why sensitivity to the hum would develop or become noticeable. Some hearers reported that the hum started suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped. One day, they heard nothing. The next day, the hum was there. What changed? Was it something in the environment or something in them? Some researchers have speculated that exposure to certain frequencies or electromagnetic fields might alter the way the auditory system processes information. Once the change occurs, the person becomes permanently attuned to the hum. Another theory proposed that the hum might be caused by infrasound. Infrasound refers to sound waves with frequencies below the lower limit of human hearing, typically below 20 Hz. While humans cannot consciously hear infrasound, they can sometimes feel it as a vibration or a sense of unease. Some researchers have suggested that infrasound could be generated by natural phenomena, such as wind passing over mountains or seismic activity. But the Taos area is not particularly prone to strong winds, and seismic activity is minimal. Infrasound has been linked to feelings of anxiety and discomfort. Studies have shown that exposure to low-frequency vibrations can cause nausea, dizziness, and a general sense of dread. Some researchers have suggested that infrasound might explain reports of hauntings and ghostly presences. Old buildings with creaky plumbing or drafty windows can produce infrasound that makes people feel uneasy without knowing why. Could the Taos hum be infrasound? It is possible, but there are problems with this explanation. Infrasound is typically felt rather than heard. Hearers describe the Taos hum as a sound, not just a sensation. They can match it to specific audible frequencies. This suggests that whatever they are perceiving is not pure infrasound, but something within the range of human hearing, even if just barely. There is also the question of source. Infrasound requires a powerful generating mechanism. Wind over mountains can produce it, but only under specific conditions. Industrial machinery can produce it, but Taos does not have heavy industry. Military equipment can produce it, but no such equipment has been identified in the area. Without a clear source, the infrasound theory remains speculative. There were also more speculative theories. Some hearers believed the hum was related to underground UFO bases. Taos is only a few hours' drive from Roswell, the site of a purported UFO crash in 1947. The idea that extraterrestrial activity might be involved was not taken seriously by the scientific community, but it persisted in local folklore. Others suggested that the hum might be caused by secret government experiments involving new technologies. The proximity of military installations and national laboratories fueled these suspicions, but no evidence ever emerged to support such claims. The UFO theory gained traction among some hearers because of the strangeness of the phenomenon. If the hum was a natural sound, why could only some people hear it? If it was man-made, why was it so difficult to locate? The inability to find a conventional explanation left room for unconventional ones. Some hearers speculated that the hum might be a byproduct of underground construction. Perhaps tunnels or facilities were being built beneath the Taos area, and the hum was the sound of drilling or ventilation systems. The military theory was particularly popular. New Mexico is home to numerous defense installations. White Sands Missile Range, Kirtland Air Force Base, and Los Alamos National Laboratory are all within a few hours' drive of Taos. The U.S. military has a long history of conducting classified research in the area. During the Cold War, Los Alamos was the center of nuclear weapons development. It is not unreasonable to think that other secret projects might still be underway. Some hearers pointed to the Navy's extremely low-frequency communication system as a possible culprit. ELF transmitters are used to communicate with submarines deep underwater. They operate at frequencies between 3 and 30 Hz, which is below the range of human hearing but close to the frequencies reported by some hearers. The problem is that the nearest ELF stations are located in Michigan and Wisconsin, thousands of miles from Taos. The signals would have to travel an enormous distance to reach New Mexico, and there is no evidence that they do. For the hearers themselves, the lack of a definitive explanation was deeply frustrating. They were not seeking attention or trying to create a mystery. They simply wanted relief from a persistent and intrusive noise. Some tried wearing earplugs, but that only made the hum seem louder. Others moved to different parts of town, or even left Taos entirely. A few found that the hum diminished or disappeared when they traveled far from the area, but it often returned when they came back. The Taos hum gained national and even international attention. It was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries. Articles appeared in newspapers and magazines. Researchers from other countries began reporting similar phenomena in their own regions. In Bristol, England, residents had been complaining about a mysterious hum since the 1970s. In Windsor, Ontario, a low-frequency drone was reported in 2011, loud enough to prompt thousands of complaints. In Kokomo, Indiana, a hum was traced to industrial fans, but even after the fans were modified, Some residents claimed they could still hear it. These reports suggested that the Taos hum was not unique. It was part of a broader phenomenon that occurred in various locations around the world. The commonality among these cases was that only a small percentage of the population could hear the hum, and no single source could be definitively identified. This pattern raised the possibility that the hum might not have a single cause. Perhaps different hums in different places were caused by different factors. In the years following the investigation, researchers continued to explore possible explanations. David Baguley, an audiologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, suggested that the hum might be a complex interaction between evolutionary adaptation, physiology, and psychology. Humans have evolved to detect certain sounds more readily than others, particularly low-frequency sounds that might signal danger. In a quiet environment, the brain might become hyper-aware of faint noises or even generate phantom sounds in an attempt to make sense of the silence. Another line of research focused on the role of the inner ear. The cochlea, the spiral-shaped organ in the inner ear, contains hair cells that convert sound vibrations into electrical signals. These hair cells can sometimes produce their own sounds, known as spontaneous otoacoustic emissions. While most people are unaware of these emissions, some individuals might perceive them as external sounds, especially in very quiet environments. There was also the possibility of a psychological component. Mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria, occurs when groups of people develop similar physical symptoms with no identifiable physical cause. Historical examples include the dancing plagues of medieval Europe, where groups of people would dance uncontrollably for days or weeks. While the term hysteria carries negative connotations, it does not imply that those affected are mentally ill or deliberately faking their symptoms. Instead, it suggests that psychological and social factors can influence perception and experience in powerful ways. But for the hearers, psychological explanations felt inadequate. They were not imagining the hum. They could match it to specific frequencies. They could describe its characteristics in consistent detail, and in many cases, multiple people in the same household could hear it, while others in the same room could not. This selectivity was one of the most puzzling aspects of the phenomenon. Some researchers proposed that the answer might lie in individual differences in auditory perception. Just as some people have perfect pitch or unusually acute vision, some individuals might have heightened sensitivity to low-frequency sounds. This sensitivity might be genetic, or it might be the result of environmental exposure or physiological changes. If the Taos hum was indeed a real external sound, but one that was at or below the threshold of normal hearing, then only those with exceptional low-frequency sensitivity would be able to detect it. The investigation into the Taos hum did not provide closure, but it did validate the experiences of the hearers. The scientific team acknowledged that they were perceiving something real, even if the source remained elusive. The report concluded with a simple statement: "We are left with a mystery." Today, more than 30 years after the hum first gained widespread attention, it still persists. Some of the original hearers have moved away or passed on, but new residents occasionally report hearing the same low-frequency drone. The phenomenon has not been solved, it has not been explained, and for those who hear it, the Taos hum remains an inescapable presence. What makes the Taos hum so unsettling is not just the sound itself, but the questions it raises. If the hum is an external sound, why can so few people hear it? If it is an internal phenomenon, why is it so consistent across different individuals? And if it is neither external nor internal, what does that mean for our understanding of perception and reality? There is something deeply disquieting about the idea that some people might be hearing something that others cannot. It challenges our assumptions about shared experience and objective reality. We take it for granted that we all inhabit the same sensory world, but the Taos hum suggests that this might not be entirely true. What one person hears, another might not. What one person finds unbearable, another might not even notice. The hum also raises questions about the limits of scientific investigation. The team that studied the Taos hum used sophisticated equipment and rigorous methods. They did everything they could to detect and measure the sound, but they came up empty. This does not mean the hum is not real. It means that it exists at the edge of what our instruments can detect, or perhaps beyond it. Science is powerful, but it is not omniscient. There are still phenomena that elude our understanding. In the end, the Taos hum remains what it has always been, a mystery. It is a sound that some people hear and others do not. It is a phenomenon that defies easy explanation. It is a reminder that the world is stranger and more complex than we often assume. And for those who hear it, it is a constant companion, a low drone that follows them through their days and haunts their nights. If you ever find yourself in Taos, standing in the high desert under a vast New Mexico sky, you might want to listen closely. Not everyone will hear it, but if you do, you will understand why it has captivated and tormented so many. The hum is still there, waiting in the silence, a sound that should not exist but somehow does. If you found this story intriguing, let us know in the comments. Have you ever heard an unexplained sound? And if you want more mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel. There are always more stories to tell.